Good morning, Olive Branch family. I'm so glad that you could join us today for our online church service. You know, over the last couple of weeks, we've been listening to Pastor Ken talk about end times, and we've been trying to figure out what does that mean to us? What does that look like? And Pastor Ken's brought some great clarity to that. And as I'm listening to him speak, there's this strange analogy that came up. And you know, in my family, we're big sports fans, and so there's something I love to watch called the Jays in 30 minutes. And it's really great because you can take the whole ball game and condense it down to just 30 minutes. You get to see all the great highlights, get all the stuff that went on in just a short time frame. But here's the thing, I already know how the game ends. I know that my team won. So as I'm watching the game, and might be in the ninth inning, and I see that my team seems to be heading for defeat, I don't get all bent out of shape and depressed and worried, because I know how it ends. What I'm looking for now is what's going to happen here to turn this whole thing around. It's kind of like Christianity. I kind of look at it the same way. You know, as Christians, we know how this ends. And so what we're doing now is we're watching it and going, what is God going to do to turn this, what looks like a defeat, into a great victory? Because we know He does. So I'm really looking forward to what Pastor Ken has to share with us today. I know it's going to be amazing, but before we get to Pastor Ken, let's just spend a few moments in worship together. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and may God bless you as we worship together.
Declare His praise. Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. Every knee will bow before Him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the
Thanks, Dan, for leading us in worship this morning. So good to know that God is in control. Jesus, the Lion and the Lamb, is coming back for us, his children. Now, his disciples asked Jesus a question about that right near the end of his life. It's called the Olivet Discourse, and that's what we've been studying. And the question is this the end? First message was, is this the end? Yes. Since Jesus, we've been living in the end times. Last week, is this the end? No. Jesus said, that there's all kinds of stuff that's going to happen, including COVID and, things like COVID, and it's not an indication of the end. It's just kind of routine history. So today, the question is this the end? Maybe. Now, let's just kind of do a little bit of a review here. The reason that this comes up even is just because of what's happening with COVID. There's just a lot of fear, We hear it all the time. There's death and there's sickness and there's closures and schools are shutting down and you need to stay at home and, world is, off the rails and so on. And it creates fear. It fills our home with fears. Except God is not the author of fear. God, in fact, gives us hope. And so that's what we've been concentrating on, the hope that he gives. Now, there have been lots of other questions that have come up during this whole thing. For instance, one of the things that we dealt with for a little bit was, is the vaccine the Antichrist? Because there's been is it the mark of the beast? There's been all kinds of speculation about that over the years. Just to kind of clue you in on that, back in the 30s, people speculated that the Social Security number was the mark of the beast. In the 50s, they speculated that it was the area code, 3-digit area code. Oh no, 666, 1970s, it's credit card numbers. 1980s, it's barcodes. Somebody's going to put a barcode on your forehead or on your right hand. 1990s, it's computers. I mean, think about it. www, same letter, 2000s, it's the locator chips that they put in pets and phones. And then, of course, in 2021, it's COVID vaccine. If you don't get the vaccine, you can't eat, you can't, mingle. And so people have all kinds of fears, but they're not related to what the Bible actually says. It's just junk that goes on out there creating fear in our culture. Now, in interpreting and reading through the prophetic words, what you have to realize is there's a context. In this case, Jesus is talking to his disciples. In the book of Revelation, John is writing this to 7 churches, so there's a context. You have to look at the Old Testament prophets that get quoted. Daniel gets quoted a lot, gets quoted in Jesus' message here. There's apocalyptic language, which is just very different graphic, visionary language, very different. You have to make sure that you're interpreting it correctly. And then part of it, and this is we're going to be dealing with a little bit today, this is God's judgment on evil empires that are destroying his plan, destroying what he wants to do. And this is a cosmic battle. This isn't just like, how good things are going here on this planet. This is a cosmic battle between good and evil, between God and the devil, the evil one, as Jesus called him. So you just have to keep all those different things in your mind. Now, today I want to talk about surprises, and of course, this is the topic. Is this the end? Well, maybe. Now, we're all familiar with surprises, right? We've learned this as kids. When I was a little kid, probably about 5 years old, I went with my dad to a friend's farm, and he said, don't go near the pond, Ken. So what did I do? I went down to the pond immediately, and I'm reaching out trying to get a tadpole that had swum to the bank and did a somersault. And all of a sudden, I'm all wet, and my dad knew that I had done exactly what he told me not to do. Bad surprise. A little bit later on that year when I was 6, it's first grade, I see my parents pull into the parking lot, and I see them getting out of the car, and they've got a big box and they've got bags with them and so on. And they walked into the room and it's, happy birthday, Kenny, and I was the hero for a day in my class because we had a birthday party and we had cake and we had all these things, balloons, we had a wonderful time. So that's a good surprise. And down through life, we have them. You're driving along, you got to get somewhere quick. You're doing a little bit over the speed limit. Well, okay, 50 kilometers over the speed limit. You see the lights in the rearview mirror. Bad surprise, okay? You see a guy or a girl, you're a teenager or 20s, and man, they make your heart beat fast, and you look at them, and their heart beats fast too. And that's a good surprise. You like that. We all like that. You go in for a routine checkup. And the doctor calls you and says, come into the office, we need to talk, okay? And you have to go in for more tests. Bad surprise. So you go in for more tests, and they call you again. They say, you're okay, you're fine, good surprise. This is just the way life is, bad surprise, good surprise. Now, Jesus brings this whole realm of surprise into what's going to be happening at the end. Now, here's his point, and this is so important to gather. You and I choose whether or not it's going to be a good surprise or a bad surprise. So we're just going to put this across here because ultimately we choose what it's going to be for us. Now, again, we've been talking about this, whole question, is this the end? And of course, what we're dealing with today is maybe. He's going to come, it's going to happen, he promised it would, but for some people, it's going to be a really good surprise. It's going to be like their best friend is visiting, and for others, it's going to be a bad surprise. It's like, your parents went away to the cottage, for the weekend. They told you not to have any parties, and they come home early, and you're in the middle of a party, and you get drunk people laying on the couches and all kinds of stuff going on. Bad surprise, and that's going to happen to some people. Now, Jesus' key word in all of this is he says, watch. Watch, man. Watch what's going on. Watch your lives. Listen to what he says. Therefore, keep watch because you do not know on which day your Lord will come. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what time of night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch and would not have let the house be broken into. And so you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come in an hour when you do not expect him. Now, what's interesting in this whole passage is, one of the questions the disciples asked is, so Jesus, when's this all going to happen? When are you going to come back? When is it going to be the end of the world? And Jesus surprised everyone by saying, I don't know. The angels don't know. Only the Father knows. He said, come on, Jesus, you're telling me you can read what people are thinking. You can, feed a crowd out of a little boy's lunch. You can walk on the water. You can be transfigured on top of a mountain and talk with, Moses and Elijah, but you don't know when you're coming? Now, the question that you have to ask is, why? Lori and I, sometimes when we take walks, we talk about, theological and philosophical questions, okay? So one of the things that we've been talking about is, does the devil read prophecy books? Does the devil know the Bible? Well, we know he does, because when he tempted Jesus, he quoted the Bible at him. In fact, the truth is, that he was there when all this stuff was written down. He was there when it got passed on and when it got translated, He was there when Peter preached and when John preached and when Jesus preached, So, he could preach a very good exegetical message. And he could tell you what the facts are behind it, and he could tell you what the original Greek words mean. The problem is, he doesn't believe any of it, okay? But he believes enough to know that what Jesus says is going to happen. Now, the imagery that Jesus uses here is difficult imagery because, we tend to think he's actually talking, okay, when I come back, man, it's going to be, I'm going to break into your house like somebody, with a crowbar and a flashlight, and I'm going to steal all your stuff. That's not what he's saying. He's just basically saying when people are smart, when people understand what's going on, they're prepared for what's going to happen. Now, Jesus' words that he uses about this are be wise and be faithful, okay? So very important to understand. Now I want to talk about this element of surprise and what it means. For example, D-Day, as you know, happened back in June 6, 1944, and it was one of the best kept secrets. In fact, they had all kinds of stuff going on. General Patton, one of the greatest generals, most feared generals by the German, he was actually, in charge of a decoy force, and they had inflatable tanks. They had all kinds of stuff to try and deke the Germans out as to when they were coming. So the point was, they didn't send a note saying, "Dear Hitler, we're coming for you on June 6th, RSVP." No, the point was that they wanted to surprise him. And the interesting thing is that it seems as if God, and I don't know this about God, I'm just saying that we know that Satan would try to sabotage anything that God is up to, anything that God wants to accomplish. And so it's very likely Jesus surprised everybody the first time. He's going to surprise everybody the second time. God could have outlined it, written it all out like a maintenance manual and so on, but he didn't. He gave us clues so that we would keep our eyes open, but he didn't lay it all out in ways that, devil and everything that he's doing could understand either. So there's just maybe a little bit of my speculation on, why he has kept this a secret. And the truth is that God has his secrets. And he's not going to tell us because we beg and pull tantrums, He has his secrets for a reason, and we just need to respect that. So Now, Jesus makes another comparison here, and it's the servant who's responsible for other servants when the boss is away. Now, that was fairly common back in that culture, because travel took months, not days. So if somebody was going to go to, like say, go off to Rome or something like that to settle accounts there from Jerusalem, that was a long journey. They were going to be gone for 3 months, Cell phones weren't quite the same back then, so there was no communication. So what would happen is, if a boss was going away or a manager of a large household or company was going away, what they would do is they'd take their most faithful, most senior servant usually, and they'd put them in charge of making sure that everything got done, that the servants got fed on time, that things happened the way they were supposed to. This is what Jesus says. Who then is the faithful and wise servant when the master has put in charge of the servants in his household to give them their food at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. Truly, I tell you, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But suppose that servant is wicked, and he says to himself, my master is staying away for a long time, and he begins to beat his fellow servants and eat and drink with drunkards. The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and in an hour that he is not aware of, and he will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's pretty scary, isn't it? Jesus asks a critical question here, and this is something that you and I have to think about. What does a wise person do when they know that they have been given a significant amount of responsibility, that what they do matters? What does a faithful person do when they know that they've been given a significant chunk of responsibility? Now, in a world like ours, we have the owner's title to our car and to our houses and stuff like this, and we pay for the mortgage and all this stuff. And it's very easy to think, well, this is all mine. We have companies, we have people, we employ people, and we think, well, these employees are all my employees. These are the people I have under me. This is all mine. What we sometimes miss is the fact that God owns and we manage, okay? So that's the key behind these words that Jesus uses here. 2 words, wise and faithful. And of course, you could also say unwise and unfaithful. Now, there are a couple of mistakes that sometimes I think people make when it comes to knowing that Jesus is coming back and being wise and being faithful. Sometimes people are really wise, but like faithful, not so much. In other words, like they're really smart about managing their money and planning for retirement, and making sure that they do well and, paying for their kids' education, doing all kinds of stuff like this. So they're wise, but they're not really thinking about the end game, okay? So it's possible to be wise, but not real faithful. And then there's the potential of being really faithful, but not that wise. Let me just give you an example of this, and I don't mean any harm to this, but my parents, I would say, were probably really faithful. They were faithful. They believed Jesus was coming back, and so what happened is they thought to themselves, well, we don't have to worry too much about retirement because he's probably going to come back before then. And so when it came to being wise about their future, not so much. So it's important to be both wise and faithful. Now, there's a key understanding behind everything that Jesus says here. This is the core understanding behind everything that Jesus teaches. And you have to remember this. You have to make sure that it forms the foundation for how you think. God owns, we manage. That's why he calls us to give back to him. It's because of the fact that, first of all, it's good for us to learn how to be generous, but it's also an investment in what he's up to and what he's doing. And it's a constant reminder, God owns, we manage. And that's the basis behind this story that Jesus tells. He says, Master goes away. It's actually his house, it's his servants, it's his food, and it's his responsibility, but somebody's shirking their duty. Somebody's not doing what they're supposed to be doing. If you do it, if you're wise, if you're faithful, then it's going to be good for you. If you're not, then that's going to be a problem. Now, let me put this in terms that some of you may understand. Many of you have children, okay? And you probably have at times gone away for an evening or whatever, for a date or something. You had to be someplace. And so you brought somebody in to watch your kids. Now, let's say that you had to have to do that for, let's say, 2 weeks, okay? So you've got some people, you trust them, you bring them into your home, and they are there to babysit your kids. And so you had a great time, and you come home, and when you come in the door, what you see is very disturbing. you find out that not only have they not been feeding them regularly, not only have they not been getting them to bed on time, they've gotten into your wine cellar and they're laying drunk on the floor of your house. And you look at your kids, and your kids are thin and pale, and they smell because they haven't had a bath. They got welts on their back because this person got drunk and beat them. How would you feel about that? Most of us would be furious. Most of us would charge a person like that with some kind of neglect and usually abuse. Now think of what the implications are of what Jesus is saying here. Why would somebody who knows what they're supposed to do, knows that they don't own the servants, knows that they don't own the property, why would somebody get drunk and just flip off their responsibilities? Well, it's either wickedness or it's just, they strayed off. They got bored, something along that line. That's a huge deal. And that's what Jesus is saying here. This is a big deal. And I used to think that Jesus' warning, you better watch, because I'm going to come when you don't expect me. I used to think that it was about him. I'm going to come at a time, and I'm going to catch you doing something evil, and then you're going to be in for it. It was kind of a warning, kind of a form of control. But that's not it. It's just basically a reminder that what we are doing is important and we are accountable for our lives. We are accountable for doing something that matters. Many of you are familiar with Bernie Madoff. He died a few weeks ago, and his name actually fits him because he made off with other people's money, in a big Ponzi scheme, about $65 billion worth of it. When he actually was sent to jail and stuff like this, his one son committed suicide because the shame was oppressive. He had a guy, one of his investors over in Europe, who also committed suicide. He was so disgraced by the people that he basically had been entrusted with the money. So imagine the fact that Bernie Madoff all of a sudden finds out that the federal government of the United States is not the final accountability. He has another accountability for what he has done and how he has ripped people off. That's the core understanding. We are accountable for what we have been entrusted with. And the big problem is that sometimes we drift. We just lose track of things. See, sometimes we tend to think that it's really about our sin quotient, It's like, well, not too bad. I've been pretty good. I haven't, done any bad things, haven't stolen anything major, and so on. I've been kind of kind to my kids and, try to do my work well and stuff like this. And so, we're thinking to ourselves, I'm totally cool. Like, my sin quotient is not bad. But that's not the problem. The issue is the self quotient. And when self and selfishness gets into our accountability, gets into what we're supposed to be doing, that creates a problem. Now, we have all kinds of, accountability. Everybody has influence, right? Everybody has influence. It's just part of it. Some of you have more influence than others. Some of you have kind of courted influence and so on. And, some of the things that go on, for instance, in the whole world of social media and stuff like this, you look for followers, right? And you send your pics out and you want to see that people like them and that people, like hearing about you and stuff like this. And here's the problem. It's possible that this is all about you. That it really has nothing to do with anything that you're trying to accomplish. It's pretty much about, bringing the attention and getting more followers and so on. And that's not a problem, having followers, but, if you've got followers, where are you leading them? See, that's the big question. Because, is it just about, people liking you? Is it about, getting the thumbs up, that everybody likes stuff? Because, if you have, hundreds of followers or if you have thousands of followers and so on, Jesus called his disciples followers. And the question is, where are you leading? That's the important question of life, you see? So, with Facebook, Instagram, work, parenting, the question we always have to ask is this actually about me? Because that was the problem of the person in Jesus' story. Instead of just doing what they were supposed to be doing, instead of being faithful, instead of being wise, they thought, hey, I got this opportunity, man, eat, drink, and be merry. Now, there are a lot of people in our world, who kind of get pushed to the front of the class because they're smart, and they're creative and they're talented. A lot of people are attracted to that. A lot of people follow them. A lot of people, want to make them their heroes and want to do what they do and so on. And the question for any leader in this world is, where are you leading people and what's going to happen to them if they follow you. And here's the question: why would people who've given their lives to Jesus, like pledged their allegiance to Him, and so on, not do this? How would a person get to the point where they're actually misusing people or abusing people or just kind of flipping off the whole thing and not doing anything with it? Luke adds some additional commentary to this, and Jesus said this too. So Luke somehow picks up on it. He says, these are Jesus' words that should be included in the Olivet Discourse. He says this: be careful, or your heart will be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, and the anxieties of life. And that day will close on you suddenly like a trap. For it will come on those who live on the face of the whole earth. In other words, it's going to come. That day is coming on everybody. Be always on the watch and pray that you may be able to escape all that is about to happen, and that you may be able to stand before the Son of Man. I mean, you're going to stand there anyways and give accountability, but it means like stay on your feet before Him. I've recently been doing some devotionals, if you've followed any of this stuff, and it's basically on kind of the essence of straying. The concept of straying actually comes from the imagery that's used in first of all, David talking about shepherd God, but especially in Isaiah chapter 53, where he tells us why we need a shepherd. And this is why. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned, every one of us, to our own way. Now, straying is not a good image, is it? When pets stray away, when we have that happen up in our area, we live in kind of a environmental area and so on, and so people go for hikes there and everything, and every once in a while you see a picture of a pet that's strayed off, and it's going to become coyote food because there's coyotes out there. Chances of a dog or a cat living are not good. When a husband or a wife strays, usually blows up a family, costs a lot of money, creates a lot of sadness and grief. When children stray, oh my word, there's nothing worse than that. Nothing worse than having one of your kids go off on some tangent and stray into all kinds of trouble. When cars stray, they wreck into other cars and sometimes kill the passengers. Now, if you have followers in your life, in other words, you have influence, we all have influence, and if you're straying, guess what happens to the followers? They're picking up on you. Well, they stray too. Now, the imagery that's used in this about sheep are kind of dumb. They're just kind of going through life. I think I've mentioned this before. They're just looking for the next clump of grass. That's it, It's kind of like munch, travel, munch, travel, munch, travel, and so on. And sometimes they actually go right off a cliff because they're not paying attention. Feet slip and whatever, and they go off a cliff. Now, here's the question. What sometimes happens is other sheep will actually go off the cliff. It's kind of like, what happened to Sally? I don't know. It looks like she went over the edge. Well, it doesn't sound like a bad idea to me. And they go over the edge. And, you may have several sheep that will actually go off the edge because they're just following each other. Because sheep are dumb, okay? And so if you're leading people someplace, you better not be straying. And I'm telling you, this gets into all the other areas of life, man. This gets into parenting, too. If you're a parent and you're just off on some tangent, you're just going for the next clump of grass, and so on. Your kids, they're following you by your example. And we are accountable for what happens, okay? We are accountable for what happens to the people around us. Now, so we all hit the anxieties of life, and that's what Jesus brings up in this thing. And that's what we're in right now. We're in an age of anxiety, and we don't know what's going to happen. And did people get their shot? And am I going to get contaminated, or am I going to kill somebody else? Or what's going to shut down? Am I going to have any money left when this is all over? So anxiety is right now. It's a part of life. What's interesting is that there are people, by the millions who are just kind of numbing themselves out. Get drunk, get high, do something. This pain, this anxiety doesn't feel very good, so I'm just going to kind of do something to anesthetize it. And that's what Jesus says. So, some people the anxieties, they get weighed down and they get drunk. They just kind of escape it. Other people scoff. They just mock the people who are going on. You idiot, what's wrong with you? How could you possibly do this, But the way through the anxiety is hope. And that's what we need. And Jesus is the one who gives us hope. Because I'll tell you, you go through life very long, and the circumstances of life, the anxieties of life are going to puncture your life, and the hope is going to drain out of you. And what Jesus wants to do is fill us up with hope. and help us to be able to keep going forward. It's really interesting, when it talks about the scoffers. We talked about this a little bit last week. Remember Peter talked about this because he certainly had people who scoffed at him, He said that, remember, he would preach. Remember how, Jesus had told him that, when the rooster crows twice, before it crows twice, you're going to reject me 3 times, So people, when Peter would preach, people out in the audience would go, ah, 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 ah. It was their way of scoffing. It was their way of, making fun of him while he talked. And I'll tell you what creates scoffers. It's people who lose hope. It's people who lose hope. You know why people eventually, their marriages drift off and they end up getting divorced? Almost always, people lose hope that anything's ever going to change. People lose hope when they try to quit drinking or they try to quit doing something that they know is destroying their lives. And they just kind of like throw themselves into the abyss, because they're hopeless. They think nothing's ever going to change. People stay in dead-end jobs, where they just endure life because they don't think things are ever going to change. And Jesus says, keep watching, because I will be there. I am going to rescue everything. I am going to change the world. There is a life to come, and the life to come, it outweighs anything that you're going through right now. I'm going to end decay, and I'm going to end death. I'm going to end boredom. Life will poke you full of holes, so you better have something that patches up and fills those holes so that you can have hope. And here's my question that I want you to think about. And I want you to think really hard about this. Is it your plan? Is it your plan to be wise? And is it your plan to be faithful? Because that's what Jesus is looking for here. When he comes, it's not going to be the surprise. Ha-ha, gotcha. I caught you doing something wrong. It's more like coming in and he says, you thought nobody noticed. You thought maybe I'd never come back. You never drew attention to yourself. You thought that you had lived well and loved and all the sacrifices just kind of dropped into a pebble in the pond, but they didn't because I noticed. I've watched you as you've watched me. I've had my eye on you the whole time. That's the surprise. Let's talk a little bit about what is the surprise or what is in store for the future. I don't know if you're familiar at all with Cliff Neckel, but my son Brian and I watch him. He has a podcast. And so Cliff, who's a pastor, I think out in the northeastern United States, he travels all over, the United States, going to universities and talking to students on campuses and answering their questions. And he gets all kinds of stuff thrown at him, accused of all different kinds of stuff. But had some very interesting debates. One debate, there's kind of this, kid standing on the sideline. He says, I don't even think I want to go to heaven. It's going to be boring. So that's given some of the popular myths around about heaven, I can understand why somebody could come to that conclusion. I mean, people think, of, floating around on clouds and playing harps, kind of an endless worship service, and maybe, they go off to this sterile gold mansion up in the sky, kind of retirement home forever. And people think about that and think, yeah, that sounds pretty boring to me. I mean, it's better than the other place, but it certainly is going to be boring. Now, some of you have been raised to think that, life is bad here, so let's just circle the wagons, and we'll just wait, until Jesus comes back. And so Jesus, kind of the ultimate helicopter parent, he's going to swoop in and scoop us off, We don't have to really be responsible for anything. He's just going to take care of us and remove all of our sorrows. Now, the really cool piece is that Jesus is, in fact, coming back, but the point is he has something for us to do. He has responsibilities for us to follow. He says this, he says, watch, I make all things new. Remember the prayer he taught us to pray? The prayer is, your kingdom come, your will be done. He's not going to scoop us off to heaven, it's somewhere way out there beyond, billions of light years away, beyond the North Star and beyond. What he is doing is he is merging his kingdom with this planet. He is going to make this his home, and in the process, he's going to make everything new. He's going to create all things new. That is really cool. You could look at it like this, okay? When you read the book of creation, when you read the story of creation, Genesis 1 and 2, you find that there's a garden, and there's trees there, and there's a stream of life, there's a river of life. When you read the end of the story in Revelations 21 and 22, you find there's a garden there. There's a river of life. There's fruit. There's trees there. And right now we live between the trees. That's where we are. And the point is to not give up hope. That God, when he comes, Jesus, when he comes back, is going to make all things new. Earth is not disposable. It wasn't like, whoops, that's my first mistake. I'm just going to burn it up and throw it away. No, it's not disposable. He created it, and it's good. In the early church, there was a heresy that came in called Gnosticism, which basically said that as the material world is all bad, flesh, food, eating, and all this stuff, sex is all bad because it's fleshly, and only the spirit is good. That is not biblical, and it's not true. And you maybe have heard some of that stuff implied, that God wears dark suits and starch shirts, and if it tastes good, spit it out, and he's against sex, and he's against apple pie, and he's against anything that either feels good or smells good or tastes good. And that's absolutely not true. He created all of that. He created all that. And when he comes back, when Jesus comes back and makes all things new and God makes his home with us, it's going to be better than you'd ever dreamed. Listen to what Romans 8 says. Paul writes this. He says, "For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed." Listen to this. "For the creation was subjected to frustration." No kidding. Not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hopes that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and in the glory of the children of God. And you read the end, Jesus said, "Behold, I make all things new." There's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. It's not that he's going to burn everything up. He's going to bring his kingdom here, and it's going to change everything. Here's what I know. If you love being with your friends and being loved and being fully known and still cherished, if you love feeling safe, if you love parties, if you love laughing yourself sick, heaven is better than you ever possibly have imagined, because all of the sadness, all the stuff that junks up our parties and junks up our love will be gone. And I don't pretend to understand for a millisecond, all of that. I can't even explain it very well. I just know that creation started with a garden. It started perfect and unspoiled and unpolluted, and that's how it's going to end. And God is going to make all things new. Boredom? That's going to be a thing of the past. You think you're going to be bored in heaven? Jesus, you look at this passage here. It says, "When the faithful and wise servant," who then is the faithful and wise servant whom the master has put in charge of the servants in his household to give them their food at the proper time? In the end, it will be good for that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. Truly, I tell you, he's going to give him, the golden parachute. He's going to retire. He's never going to have to work ever again. No, that's not what it says. It says he will put him in charge of all his possessions. In other words, we have responsibility here until Jesus comes back. We have responsibility to care for what he's given us. We have responsibility to lead well. We have responsibility to have a redemptive influence. And we have responsibilities there too. And all the boredom, all the junk, all the, Wheel of Fortune and Days of Our Lives and, Jerry Springer Show reruns. It's all going to be gone. All the boring, stupid things that we do. And the good and faithful servant is apparently going to be entrusted with more, which is good for all of you, people who are way out there in terms of, you just love to work and you love to do stuff. So it's going to be good. It says this in 1 Corinthians 2:9. "No eye has seen, no ear has heard, and no mind has imagined what God has prepared for those who love him." God created sex, and it was good. God made puppies, and they were good. God thought up love and joy and peace and kisses and grandchildren, and it was all good. God thought up the animal kingdom, all the weird and colorful species that are out there, and it was all good. He thought up pizza. Well, he didn't actually think up pizza, but he gave people the idea. And apple pie and pecan pie and bananas and laughter and water and swimming, and coral reefs. And what this passage says is, you ain't seen nothing yet. You got to wait and see what he has for you, because it's better than you ever dreamed. That's a good thing. That's our future. But you see, if I'm going to be fair, and if I'm going to be biblical, and if I'm going to be true to Jesus and his calling, I need to remind you that there is such a thing as judgment. There is. I mean, think about it. According to Peter, God is holding everything up so that everyone who wants to can find life. He doesn't want anybody to be lost. He wants to end sex trafficking. He wants to end wars and pandemics and so on, and drug abuse. But it continues because he's still waiting for people. He's still waiting for the drug addicts to come. He's waiting for the sex traffickers to come home. He's waiting for the people who have wasted their lives to find life. He's waiting for that to happen. So does it make sense that people who know something about Jesus and know something about God's ultimate plan and could know more if they wanted to, but refuse to respect him, refuse to even care about what he has for the future, would it make sense that there's going to be judgment, they're going to be called to accountability for living all for themselves? It does. Just like the people would be called to judgment who've just basically thought that they owned, what the master's business was, and they've got his feet up on their desk and they're smoking his cigars and kicking everybody around. He comes home, there's going to be problems. You can trust your kids to babysit them and so on, somebody to babysit them, and you come home and you find out that not only have they been not cared for, they've been abused. There's accountability for that. There's a judgment for that. The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, in an hour that he's not aware of, and he will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And I'm telling you, I don't even want to think about that. What I do want is I want to be wise, and I want to be faithful. And that takes some doing. Every morning when I pray, God, I give my heart to you. You know that this heart can cook up all kinds of stuff. This heart will lie for me. This heart will figure out what I want and then go for it no matter who gets hurt. And it will lie to my mind, and it will lie to my hands, and it will lie to my eyes. And I need my heart to belong to you, because if I don't, it'll get weighed down with all this other junk. My prayer is that I will stay faithful. And my prayer is that I will make wise decisions and not stray off in some other direction. And so the question is this the end? I mean, could Jesus come back today? Could he drop the curtains on history? Maybe. See, he surprised everybody the first time he came. Nobody expected him, And all the religion professionals, they'd taken over the temple, taken over everything else, They actually, the people who talked about him the most, actually nailed him to a cross. They didn't recognize him. And I want to recognize him when he comes back. Not as somebody who's coming as a threat, somebody who's coming, to make me pay for all the stuff I've done. He already did that on the cross. But coming to reward faithfulness and wisdom. God doesn't expect us to be perfect. The chances are that most of us are going to be involved in some kind of sin, whatever it happens to be, when he comes back. And that's not what Jesus is expecting. What he does expect, though, is for us to believe in the fact of accountability and believe in what he has called us to do and believe in the people that he's called us to lead and be wise and be faithful. See, we are servants of the Most High God. We are servants of the Most High God. We are made in his image. We are made for eternity. Jesus is coming back to make all things new. And that's good news. And so his words are, watch. Don't get distracted. Don't stray off course. Don't just keep plodding through life, looking for the next clump of grass to eat. Keep your eyes open and make the difference that you were created to make. And it will go well with that servant who's found doing what he is supposed to be doing when the end comes. Let's pray. God, I pray that we would be found faithful. It's so easy, God, in a world like ours to keep our eyes on the news and to keep our eyes on the finances and to keep our eyes on our home and keep our eyes on our car and on everything else that's going on in our lives and forget that you manage all of history, that you are at work in everything that we do, and that we have been given meaningful work to do. You have made us accountable. Help us to take seriously the responsibility that you have placed in our hands and in our lives. And to be wise, and to be faithful. Amen. Dan is going to come and lead us in a song about the grace of God and the power of God for people who are weak and small and forget what we're all about. Dan, please come and lead us in worship.
a sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior, His ransomed me. And like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. The Lord has promised good to me. His word my hope secures. He will my shield and portion be, as long as life endures. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior, His ransomed me. And like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior, His ransomed me. And like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. The earth shall soon dissolve like snow. The sun forbear to shine, but God who called me here below will be forever mine, will be forever mine. You are forever mine.
And so may God go with you, whatever you do, whatever followers you may have on Instagram or wherever you may be with your blog or your podcast or whatever it is. May God go with you. May you manage what He has placed in your hands wisely and faithfully. And remember that what you do in this world, what you do with your life, makes a difference. Amen.